Funding for the following program has been provided by this station and other public television stations, and by a grant from the Chubb Group of Insurance Companies.
Good evening. One of the delights for me of doing this kind of show is that I get the chance to talk with, in this case, two of my favorite writers, John Cheever and John Updike. And tonight I'm going to have a chance to double my pleasure, because I have spoken to them both individually, but now I have them here together. And here they are, John Cheever and John Updike. Mr. Cheever, by the way, and Mr. Updike have, I guess, a lot in common, besides their first names. They're both men who became celebrated early in their careers for their short stories. They both published in The New Yorker. In the last few years, both have produced some of the most talked about and startling novels in recent American lit. And their work is often linked together by readers and critics. And as it turns out, they also share friendship as well as admiration for each other's work. So if you'll welcome them, please, we'll begin this rare opportunity to talk with both Cheever and Updike. John and John. John's other John. I realized the other day that among things I can recall about what friends I have, I very seldom can recall where I first met them for some strange reason. Can you tell where you two first ran across each other?
Oh, no, I can't. I do remember a correspondence, a very early correspondence. When John moved to Ipswich, I was able to remember that my father had written to me on my first trip to Europe that whatever I might see of the grandeurs of Western civilization, I would never see anything to match the beauty of the Ipswich marshes.
Really?
And I remember writing to you. I think it was a correspondence before we met.
My first sense of when we met was in Russia. Now, I might be wrong about that, but certainly it was in the Soviet Union in the days, this was in 1964, when there was a fairly active cultural exchange program between the two superpowers, and John and I overlapped for about 10 days, and he made it a delightful 10 days. I was slightly spooked in the Soviet Union, but John thought it was a terrific place to be and made it all fun for all of us, the Russians and Americans alike.
Oh, the only time that we ever appeared in public, I think, together was in Leningrad, with the exception of this occasion, yes.
I wonder why you liked the Soviet Union better than he did.
Well, that's not it. Actually, it's not a competitive sport. I was trying to get a football so that John and I and Yevtushenko could play touch football in Red Square. It was mine.
This was a serious trip.
Sorry.
The first time I met you, if you care, I was standing at a party in Long Island, and I'm rarely at parties in Long Island, and this mellow voice arose at my side like almost a fountain of water in the desert, and I said, that man can do a Dick Cavett imitation. And it was Dick Cavett.
I seem to recall you saying it wasn't a very good imitation.
No, you had it.
I thought you were going to say, and it was Dinah Shore, or something, the mellow voice beside you. You're different writers, I guess, and obviously. Otherwise, you'd be the same. But people do constantly link you together. I know that, I don't think writers like that, do they? I mean, they always say Malamud Roth, and what was the third they always put in there? And Saul Bellow. And I think Saul Bellow said once, I don't like being one of the Hart, Schaffner, and Marx of writing. And Updike and Cheever are often linked, even to the point, forgive me for bringing this up, when sometimes someone will say, I find it hard to keep them straight. Well, that's certainly introduced to Paul.
I'm very flattered by the linkage, if insofar as it exists. I've been admiring John long before I became a writer, so the linkage redounds to my benefit considerably. I wish I could write like John Cheever, but I don't feel I do, and I see him do things effortlessly that I couldn't do with a great deal of effort. So the similarities to me aren't as meaningful as the differences.
Is he an influence?
Well, yes, I think so. I think any good writer to some extent influences you, but it was not John's writing that led me to write about suburbia. It was the fact that I lived in a kind of suburb, and I think our attitudes behind these superficial resemblances that are so striking, there's really quite a difference. Attitude toward our material and the angle, the kind of color we bring to it. John is, in a way, I think, more of a transcendentalist than I am. There's a kind of radiance which he feels and conveys that I'm not sure I always do feel or convey.
Would it be interesting or fun for each of you to try to pull off the prank of writing a story under the other's name? Could you parody each other? Or
I don't know whether John has done it or not, but I have occasionally, when John has brought off a paragraph that I think so much greatly superior to anything that I had ever accomplished. And my feeling always is, writing, of course, is not a competitive endeavor, but when I do read a page of John's it seems to me marvelous, my idea is to put it in a bucket of water and read it upside down. And then occasionally I will try, very much as I suppose a musician will, to see if I can run off a line of that particular kind of line. I think the resemblance between John and me, firstly, there is, of course, a vast difference of age. I'm old enough to be John's father. And I'm an old man nearing the end of my journey, and he's at the peak of his power. And I think the resemblance has also been perhaps exaggerated by the fact that we both are published in the New Yorker. Mm-hmm. I'm deeply indebted to John for the excellence of his work. And in his last novel, Rabbit is Rich, I think, as I said, I think it's the most exciting novel I've read in a great many years. And John also has consistently given one the impression that writing is an estimable profession. One sometimes loses that in reading reviews of books about sensitive young men who've lost their mothers, going over Niagara Falls in a barrel, that kind of thing.
When you say that, since you don't write criticism, and this is, as far as I know, you don't review books, and John Updike does constantly, here's our chance to find out maybe why you don't. If you were to write a review of his, what would you say makes it whatever you just said, one of the most exciting novels of the present?
The reason I don't review the book is because it would have taken me perhaps 3 weeks. My appreciation of it is that diverse and that complicated. Mm-hmm. I enjoy the book very much because I enjoy John's intelligence, his maturity, and his giftedness. But more than that, I think John is perhaps the only contemporary writer I know now who gives me the sense of the fact that life is, that the life we perform is in an environment that enjoys a grandeur that escapes us. That Rabbit is very much possessed of a paradise lost, of a paradise known fleetingly, perhaps through erotic love, and a paradise that he pursues through his children. It's the vastness of John's scope that I would have described if I could in a review.
On the program that he and I did together without you, we talked about that. Sex gets dragged into everything, but since it does, there must be some significance to that. You are not known for writing explicit sexual scenes, almost as if you'd made a decision not to. Is that fair?
Well, yes, I suppose it is fair. The precise emphasis that one should give to carnal acrobatics is something that has bewildered most men since, I believe, the beginning of time.
Well, I remember something, and I can't remember where you said this, or maybe wrote it, maybe it was on a show we did together, where you talked about how can you take one's most exalted feelings, forgive me for butchering a quote of yours in front of you, and making it like the nuts and bolts and jack and rim of changing a tire, making it all that specific. I think that was so. Do you remember saying something?
It does sound as though I had said. I do feel as though I had said something of the sort. Yes. I expect that it simply is not my disposition to write write explicitly about erotic drives. However, it does seem to me that that the emphasis on our erotic life has always been a questionable or something that a pursuit that we're constantly challenging.
Why did both of you leave New York? That's interesting. You started here. You had promising, flourishing careers, it seems. You could have been very successful as New York as well as New Yorker writers. Did you get out because your material seemed to lie elsewhere, or because of some detrimental effect of being in New York?
I think John was here longer than I was and has written beautifully about New York life when it was still possible to have a kind of domestic existence in apartment houses. I left for practical reasons. To a large extent, I had a growing family and saw that to house them and educate them here would be more of a hassle than it might be worth, and I felt that my freedom to write what I chose somehow lay outside the city, so I got a good way away from it, but always enjoy coming back and feel that in some way I still live here, or at least this is my capital. I'm always excited to return, almost as excited to leave.
I left for precisely the same reasons. I had a growing family and the education and of children and the problems of housing were much more simply answered in the suburbs.
Did having growing families early on, which you both did, affect your writing, do you think?
Well, that would seem almost as though one were obliged to say that it was good or bad for one's writing. It seemed to me quite as much a part of one's destiny as breathing.
May have found it harder to find a place to do it quietly, but when you get together, do you tend to talk literature or baseball or just what?
We have talked both, actually. John's very knowledgeable about baseball and some writing to a degree. I think it's hard for writers, however fond they are of each other personally and however much they admire the work of another, to really talk shop, because the author's shop is so deep within that it's almost beyond articulating, or if you did, it would seem like a kind of bragging. So I'd say we gossip about literature more than talk about it.
And on the question of baseball, John's description of Ted Williams' last home run is one of the most beautiful pieces of baseball writing I know. Do you know it?
What's that in?
It appeared in the New Yorker and it's been published privately. It's also in a collection of assorted pieces.
It's in a collection. It's my one bid to be a sports writer, and people even now think that I can do it, so I'm invited to write about basketball or something. But the fact is, I don't know sports well. I did know Ted Williams well. I somehow fell in love with him from afar when I was a boy in Pennsylvania, and so when he finally retired, I brought to it a lot of backed up emotion and knowledge, but I had that only on that one tiny subject.
Neither of you read Bat Boy for the Giants at an impressionable age, did you? As I did.
I'm looking forward to reading it. It's one of the books right at the front of my shelf.
I read that in 9th grade and wanted to pack my bags immediately. That's all I wanted to be. We talked about leaving New York City, and even leaving America. Some writers have done that and continued to flourish. And I do remember a poem you wrote. And it's going to be murder now to slaughter a poem of yours in front of you, but the effect of it was, you said something about America with your sleazy diners and your this and that and your dreary street corners and your coming apart at the seams and so on. This is all in brackets now, none of this is quoting. But the end of it was something like the effect of, don't read your reviews, you're still the best of all.
I didn't say your best
of
all, I said...
cringing, can you?
No, you got a lot of it right, and that was sort of the spirit of it. It said, don't read your reviews, America. That was written in 1969 when I was living in England, and America was receiving a lot of bad reviews in these sanctimonious European countries that were essentially thriving under our military umbrella, so I was kind of sore about that, but only a little bit sore. And the sense of fondness, I was homesick also, having lived in London for 9 months, and I've never been tempted to make my residence outside of this country. I feel my assignment is the United States of America as it exists in these decades, and I've only, whenever I have left, I've felt somewhat homesick. I think it's a little good, actually, to get away now and then, but no, not an exile.
Could you write in a comfortable chalet in Switzerland, do you think, John?
I haven't any idea. The impulse or the drive to get away was very strong in the 20s when Malcolm Cowley recorded the history of that generation. And there, my feeling was, I believed that our civilization in the United States, presumably before the crash, was so mercenary that no sensitive writer could endure here. Hemingway was one of the leaders of that. No, but that is an altogether different experience. We've never had a comparable experience. I have lived in Europe, and I'm very devoted to my own country. When you speak of John's description of sleaziness in his country, in this last book, he does, without any trace of rue or melancholy, describe rural neighborhoods overtaken by highways and the loss of architectural dignity and so forth. But it is never with where are the cow pastures of yesterday, which is which I find very heartening and very practical.
You talked also last time with Mr. Updike alone about this fact that so many people find startling that you go to church. I'd love to hear you talk about why.
One of the reasons I go to church is because I find that in my knees, in church, I enjoy a level of introspection that is granted to me at no other time during my week. I also go, of course, to pray because there are areas of gratitude and anticipation and expectation that are absolutely imponderable and encompassed in prayer.
So, if you're to be described as a believer, does not embarrass you, or
oh, not at all. No,
old-fashioned,
no. I say the credo very loudly.
You do?
Oh, very. Yeah.
Would you want to do it for us?
No. This is a very short show.
Is that the same as the Apostles' Creed?
Yes.
The Apostles' Creed.
Yeah.
You've talked about his writing with authority. That was the word you used. The authority with which Cheever can describe or write or explain or elucidate or whatever. Do you remember what you
I said or what I meant? I don't know. As I can elaborate on it immensely. It's a gift of quickness. John is in excellent touch with America in many of its details. I feel that he understands how men make and lose money in a way that's almost divinely intuitive. I don't quite understand how money moves around in our society. John does. I think that all of his observations of men and women interacting, there is this sense of radiance, of something lovely here. We were talking about sex. John does not do the nuts and bolts, but certainly the erotic feeling and the love, indeed, in his short stories and the novels is very strong. I don't know, he just makes me feel as though I'm living in an interesting world, in the world that is a kind of paradise, or could be, or was. It's not a gift given to every writer. I think one trouble with many fiction writers is that we feel drabness here, the drabness of our everyday lives, and there's no shift in gears somehow, whereas John does bring us without effort onto the plane where things somehow really matter.
Is this difficult to sit and hear yourself spoken of?
Of course I want to immediately return this, sir, which could get to be very tiresome, but I would like to say...
But not to us.
I would like to say that John is distinguished by his complete disinterest in celebrity and wealth. This I consider a very rare and desirable distinction. and also by his devotion to literature, and to literature as a force that one contributes to, rather than to a force in which one seizes a stellar role. And to literature as a very serious, as perhaps I consider it to be the most exalted and serious dialogue that goes on between mature and well-informed men and women. Looking at the Times, sometimes in the morning, one finds well past sports, perhaps as odd as it should be, but well past what to do with your old apartment, well past what to do with the leftover food, well past what Diana Vreeland wore yesterday or the day before. Then we have the book review, which sometimes in the morning paper is the only serious dialogue between well-informed men and women in the paper, but the fact that it exists seems to me a very good example of the invincibility of literature, an invincibility that I think John makes an inestimable contribution towards. That's that one.
Wow. I bet you wish you had Norman Mailer and Gore Vidal back on the show, don't you?
Hey, speaking of Mailer and Vidal, do you see anything wrong then with the writers who advertise themselves, those who do really cultivate and long for appearances on talk shows, in fact do them extremely well, as both those gents do? Is there any danger in that for a writer, talking away his work, or any other danger in celebrity?
This would be a poor place for us to talk about how we never go on talk shows. But no, I think in moderation it's fine. I'm all for people doing what they must to survive and what makes them feel good. Undoubtedly, the media exists. Your show is about the nicest way for an author to display his personality, I think, that exists in America now. Why not, if you're so minded, go on. Just keep, and one thing in mind is that it doesn't make your books any better, and it doesn't make you a better writer. It might sell a few, but only a few is my guess. But basically, you should not confuse the idea of yourself as a writer with your idea of yourself as a pundit or as a star of any sort, really.
It is gratifying in a way, and this is not a self-appointed compliment, but I love to hear when somebody says, I'm sorry to say I'd never heard of Eudora Welty, and when I saw her on your show, I thought she was so wonderful that I've now read all her books. So maybe there's a way in which television isn't necessarily killing reading.
Well, it seems to me that one of the important qualities of literature is that it does exist independently from merchandising. And celebrity sometimes is inclined to to confuse the issue. A good book can very often conquer the fact that it is not advertised. That there is a reading public, there is a knowledgeable reading public in this country, and as a matter of fact, all over the world. You go into something like 10 languages, or more perhaps, and that these people will seek out a serious, penetrating novel.
Let me ask a more personal question in the usual sense of the word personal. My impression is that you, Mr. Updike, have led a more placid life in some way than John has. And the last time, maybe it was the first time you were here, you talked most frankly and interestingly about booze and other vices. Is this a point of principle on your part, or metabolism, or what would it be?
I'm pleased to have a placid life assigned to me, and I accept it.
It's not an insult.
I just find, let's just accept your point that I've led a placid life. Okay. My father's life, again, was kind of a model to me of a dutiful American male, and I grew up thinking that this was the thing to be. And I've tried in my fashion to be one. Also, as far as productivity goes in writing, I just find a quiet life is much the best kind to write out of. It is true that you need to kind of know what makes the world go around, so entire quietness isn't to be desired either, but by and large, regular habits and making a firm alliance with a few people seems to me to be a nice way for this particular set of genes and muscles to go through our vale of tears.
I guess I didn't mean to call you unplacid, but...
I'm so much older than John.
That's right.
You've had more time to be unplacid.
There's still time for lack of placidity.
Still time. I'm glad to hear that. That's very reassuring.
One of you went to college and the other didn't. Does that make either of you a better writer in any way?
Should they guess which of us did?
Of course,
John,
John obviously, conspicuously enjoys the benefits of an education, and I lack them. I think John's critical faculties and in his book reviews, his literary assessments, I benefit greatly from academic discipline. That's why I can't review books, because I never went to college.
You are a very learned, actually, fellow in my book, and I don't think my going to college, it was necessary for me because I think without it I would have not known even how to find the bottom rung of the ladder. I mean, I needed it as a piece of polishing, and also it was more the rule in my generation than in John's. But except for the reviews, I don't see that it helps me an awful lot. It is true that I was an English major, and when I came to write these reviews, I was able to dredge up some of my old English majoring. But as far as actually finding the quick of human experience or putting it into words that sing, I'm not sure an education can do that for you.
I promised someone you would tell the story of your wife in Nabucco. And we have only 2 minutes left.
I'll make it brief. I'm not sure that Martha wants me to tell stories about her, but this is one entirely to her credit. She took Vladimir Nabokov's course at Cornell. I think the last year she took it, and she was loved him, admired him greatly as a teacher, did everything he said, took all the notes, and read the books just the way he instructed, and when the time came for the exams, they were all scattered out on the stage of the lecture hall. She went up to hers, wasn't there. She looked and looked. Everybody else came and went away. Finally, she was left alone and no book, and he came out and looked at her up and down and asked her name, and he pulled out from behind his back this book and gave it to her, and it was marked with a 97 or a 98. And he said, I just wanted to see what a genius looked like. Which was both flattering and yet a little unsettling, not entirely pleasant, I think. But anyway, it is a story that Martha has told me, and now I've confided it to the multitudes.
And he never called or wrote again?
No further contact on a personal level as far as I know.
That's right.
He wrote Lolita about somebody else and went to Switzerland.
Well, gentlemen, I'm afraid we're out of time. This has been most delightful. By the way, quickly, could either of you still have a short story rejected by the New Yorker?
Oh, certainly.
Yes.
Really?
Yes,
oh,
indeed.
Yes.
Well,
I'm very good
so.
at that. You hope so, right?
And do you, in fact?
I haven't submitted anything wrong recently. I'll try.
Try.
I've had good luck lately, but it can happen, of course.
Well, that
should happen.
I think that would be very encouraging and discouraging to would-be writers. John Cheever and John Updike, together again for the first time on film. See you next time.